in People versus Robert Durst. Mr. Durst is here with his lawyers, Mr. DeGuerin and Mr. Chesnoff. We have Mr. Bailey and Mr. Miata, Mr. Henderson, and Mr. Lewin. Mr. Lewin, you may continue your cross-examination of the defendant.
Mr. Durst, you had previously testified that you told Susie Giordano about the cadaver note, correct?
Correct.
When did you tell her about the cadaver note?
When she visited me in New Orleans.
And that would have been in 2015, correct?
Correct.
And when you told her about the cadaver note, did you also tell her that you had found Susan's body?
Yes.
And did you tell her the story about Diane Boucher as well?
I don't remember us discussing Diane Boucher.
Did you tell her anything about your staycation plans with Susan?
No, I don't think so.
Well, when you told her that you had found Susan's body, did you explain to her why you had been in Los Angeles in the first place?
I don't remember.
Well, you would agree, Mr. Durst, that if you were explaining to somebody that I found my best friend's body and I wrote the note to the police saying the body was there, wouldn't you expect that that person is going to ask you, hey, so Bob, what happened?
I just don't remember the conversation that well.
So you have no memory of whether or not you gave your alibi to Susie Giordano?
My conversation with Susie Giordano, I don't think was an alibi.
Well, you explained to Susie Giordano that you had found Susan's body.
Correct.
So wouldn't you have to have explained to her the circumstances of how you found Susan's body?
I don't know.
I gotta ask, you didn't by chance tell Susie Giordano that you murdered Susan, did you?
I did not tell Susie Giordano that I committed murder.
So you saw Susie Giordano testify, correct?
Correct.
Would you agree that she certainly could have been asked while she testified about the information you'd previously told her, correct?
I don't remember that either.
Well, you remember she was in the courtroom testifying in front of you, correct?
Correct.
Do you remember me asking her questions whether or not she had ever had any conversations with you regarding Susan Berman's murder? Do you recall that?
No.
Do you recall her denying specifically that she had spoken to you at all about it?
Don't remember that either.
Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that Susie Giordano, knowing 5 years ago, for the last 6 years, that you had written the cadaver note, that would give her significant leverage over you if she wanted, correct?
I don't know what you mean by significant leverage.
Well, meaning, so let's say that since you're saying she knew that you'd written the cadaver note, wouldn't she be in a position to, as an example, say, hey, Bob, send me a bunch of money?
Prior to being arrested, I sent her $300,000 so that she could pay off her 4 kids' student loans and so that she could bring her mortgage up to date.
You were also sending her money after you were arrested, correct?
Yes, but, well, I hate to refer to any amount as small, but relatively small amounts after I was arrested.
Well, you would agree, Mr. Durst, that the 2 people that is alleged, one you admit had information that connected you to Susan Berman's murder, and one, Susan Berman, there is evidence connected you to Kathy Durst's disappearance and killing, that both these women received very large sums of money from you over the years, correct?
Yes, I gave Susan Berman money and I gave Susie Giordano money.
Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that even if there is an innocent explanation for both of those women and the money that you've given them, would you agree that a reasonable person looking at it, it would be fair to say, gosh, that looks fishy? All right.
I don't know what a reasonable person would do.
Oh, Mr. Durst, you know, when the judge says that it's sustained, then that means you're not supposed to answer. You understand that, right?
I can't go as fast as you and the judge and Dick DeGuerin go. I am aware that if the judge sustains an objection, I don't have to answer the question. But the 3 of you do your stuff at the same time.
Okay. Everybody says I take a long time, so I thought I was going too slow. So, all right, if you can, just take a moment to see if there is an objection or if it's been sustained. All right, I want to talk to you about a different area. You are somebody who you have admitted is a very private person, correct?
I am a private person.
Do you think the adjective very is unfair?
I'm happy to be a very private person, too, if that's what you want me to say.
Well, Mr. Durst, I only want you to answer the question as honestly as you can. Do you think it's fair? Do you think it's fair to refer yourself as a very private person?
I don't know the distinction between a private person and a very private person.
Well, so in terms of people that you know, people you've associated with, people you've had dealings with in your life, would you say that you are one of the more private people that you know?
I would really have to think about it to come up with an answer like that. I've known people for the last 78 years. I have to run through everybody I ever met and think about something. Oh, am I more private than him? Am I more private than her? Am I very, very private?
Well, I don't want you to do that. I'm just saying when I ask the question, what's kind of your general response to it when you hear it?
My general response is, I can't compare.
Okay. Would you agree that Susan Berman was not necessarily an easy person to spend time with?
I found her easy to spend time with.
Would you agree that she was very needy and high maintenance?
She she tested her friends. She had Nick Shaven wrapped around her little finger. When she went back and forth to New York, Nick Shaven would go to the airport and pick her up, something nobody else does in New York.
Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that given your kind of interest in being very private and Susan's neediness, that in terms of picking a roommate, someone to live right underneath you, wouldn't she be about the last choice for you?
And why did I choose her as a friend?
No. I'm asking you, you're not just choosing as a friend, you're basically, according to your testimony, she's going to live right in the same building right below you. You'll have Susie Berman 24/7.
I wouldn't like to live in the same building as Susan Berman.
But Mr. Durst, you were going to be living in the same building because you had invited her to live on the place you were allegedly on Telegraph Road.
Telegraph Place. Yes, there was a 3-story building. I was going to use the top 2 floors. The bottom floor, the first floor, was a garage and a small 1-bedroom apartment. And I was going to offer Susan the 1-bedroom apartment. I did offer Susan the 1-bedroom apartment.
Mr. Durst, a moment ago, did you forget when you answered that you would not like to live with Susie, did you forget that your alibi in this case is that you were actually building a home for the 2 of you to share?
I did not say that I did not want to live with Susan.
What was your response that you said a moment ago?
I said I would enjoy having Susan Berman in the same building as me.
You said you wouldn't enjoy, correct?
I would enjoy having Susan Berman in the same building with me.
So a moment ago, Mr. Durst, you didn't, I don't have the exact words that you used, but a moment ago, did you not say something similar to, you would not want to live with Susan Berman?
You put the knot in the wrong place.
Okay, would you agree, Mr. Durst, that given kind of your personality and attitude, that it would be a fair assessment for somebody looking at the situation to say, gosh, it's hard to imagine Bob Durst offering to let Susan Berman live with them?
Argument sustained.
All right, I want to talk about firearms.
You're not going to let me answer your question?
Well, I don't get to decide. I voted yes, but I was outvoted by the guy in charge. Well, I don't think it mattered. So I've got to ask you a new question, Mr. Durst.
You think it's unreasonable that I gave Susie Berman money. And now you're going to tell me it's unreasonable that I would want to live with her. But that's not the case. I had no problem giving her money, and I would have no problem with her living on the first floor at 52 Telegraph Place while I lived on the top 2 floors.
Mr. Durst, in that situation, wouldn't you have been in a position where, in essence, you would have been right there kind of at Susie Berman's beck and call for everything she needed?
No, I did not let her. Susan would test her friends. she would ask them to do stuff she thought they might not want to do to see if they were true friends. I did not let her do that to me.
So it's your testimony that you would have been quite happy to have shared your home with Susie?
I'm going to share the building with her. She's going to have her home, and I'm going to have my home in the same building.
Mr. Durst, I want to talk about firearms. You've testified that you are experienced with firearms, correct?
Correct.
And you have fairly extensive experience with pistols, correct?
Correct.
You've owned many different handguns over your lifetime, is that right?
Correct.
And you're also, according to your prior statements, you are at least a reasonably proficient target shooter, is that correct?
I'm a pretty good target shooter.
And in fact, that's something that you related to Andrew Jarecki even during your December 12, 2010 interview, correct?
I don't remember what I told Andrew Jarecki about firearms.
In fact, in the early 90s, when you moved to Texas, you actually leased a farm specifically so you would have a place for target shooting and camping, correct?
It wasn't specifically for target shooting. We went camping there. We did things besides target shooting.
Do you recall testifying at your Galveston trial on October 23, 2003, while under oath? Page 25, lines 2, 3, 4. I had leased a farm, yes. Question, okay, what for? Answer, for camping and target shooting. That's what you testified to, correct?
I haven't been able to read it yet. The yellow's making it hard to read.
Oh, what did you, I read it out loud. It basically says that you said you leased a farm for camping and target shooting. Is that correct?
Yes, I can read it now. It says I leased a farm for camping and target shooting.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
And would you agree, Mr. Durst, that as a target shooter, you know that a .22 is a very popular weapon for target competition, correct?
Correct.
And you would agree that a .22, especially a .22 in a full frame, do you know what I mean by that, Mr. Durst?
I don't know what you mean by in a full frame.
So the .22 that you bought allegedly for Morris, you know that firearm, correct?
Correct.
In essence, you would agree that's basically, it has the body of a .45. It's basically a large handgun that in essence fires .22 caliber rounds, correct?
Yes, I bought that because Morris was not good at kickback from a 9mm. So I bought what I call a target shooting .22, which is a .22 in a big gun that has very little kickback.
Right, and the reason that you want a larger framed, bigger gun that fires the .22 round is that the gun has less kickback and it's easier to maintain your sight picture between shots, correct?
Correct.
Do you know when I refer to a hair or a light trigger, a hair trigger or a light trigger, do you know what that is?
Well, I'm not familiar with that expression being used for, a light trigger is obviously something that'll go off that you don't need much pressure to make it shoot.
And you would agree that when you're target shooting, right, you have the firearm is out, and you're trying to be still, maintain your breathing, and then you want to carefully squeeze off a round without changing the position of the firearm, correct?
I guess.
Well, Mr. Durst, you've said that you are a proficient target shooter. Am I discussing advanced techniques with you, or is this pretty basic firearms, target shooting information? Do you agree?
I don't agree, I don't disagree. A light trigger presumably means you don't have to pull hard on the trigger to make it shoot.
You agree, Mr. Durst, if you can watch my hand for a second? If you can watch my hand for a minute? When you have your gun and you're putting pressure on the trigger, you would agree that the more pressure it takes to pull the trigger, the more the gun tends to move in tiny ways and mess up your shot. Would you agree?
I would disagree.
Well, you're aware, Mr. Durst, that traditionally target pistols tend to have lighter trigger pulls, meaning it takes less pressure to pull the trigger, because you want to be in a situation where you can fire off that round and not affect your shot. Do you agree or disagree with that premise?
You seem to know far more about it than I do. I never shot competitively.
Well, you are aware, Mr. Durst, that although you said you haven't shot competitively, you are aware that a target pistol with a light trigger pull is easier to keep on the target. Would you agree?
I neither agree or disagree.
Would you agree that when you have a weapon that has a lighter trigger pull, that means that it takes less pressure on the trigger for the gun to fire?
I will accept that.
Okay, when you're saying you accept that, that's a fact, correct?
I don't know if it's a fact.
You don't know, Mr. Durst, that if a gun has a lighter trigger pull, that it takes less pressure to make a round go off by pressing the trigger?
I think you're.
Overall.
352.
I think you are
not yet.
stating a tautology.
All right, you got me. I don't know what is a tautology. I don't know what that is.
A lighter trigger pull is definitely lighter.
I lost. Does that mean you agree with my analogy or not? That a lighter trigger pull takes less pressure for the gun to go off? Do you agree or disagree with that?
I'll tell you again that with a lighter trigger pull, it takes less pressure.
So, Mr. Durst, would you agree that if you assume that somebody has been reckless with firearms, so I want you to assume the following hypothetical. You have an individual who you are aware has a history of being reckless with firearms. And the way that they are reckless with their firearm is that they fire off rapid shots, kind of like Dirty Harry style. And that has resulted in the past, with them firing shots that they did not intend to fire. Do you understand what I'm saying?
That would result in them firing shots before they were fully ready to fire.
Agreed. So you agree with that premise, correct?
Well, it could be said better, but I'll agree with it.
I'm used to your lawyers and the judge criticizing my questions. I can't get it from three sides. Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that an individual who has a history of doing that is extremely dangerous in handling a firearm?
If someone has a history of doing what?
If someone has a history of taking a gun and then rapid firing that gun and actually firing off rounds or attempting to fire off rounds when that gun is not pointed in a safe direction, would you agree that would be extremely reckless conduct?
I would agree.
Would you agree that that's the kind of conduct that can easily get somebody killed?
Any conduct with a gun can get someone killed.
Well, would you agree, Mr. Durst, that there's a difference between somebody competently handling a firearm and someone handling a firearm in a manner where they are firing off rounds unintentionally and at a time when that firearm is not pointed in a safe direction? Would you agree?
Out of exhaustion, I will agree.
Okay. I'll take it how I can get it. Would you agree that a .22 caliber firearm is much quieter when it fires around than, say, a 9mm firearm or a .45? And I'm saying assuming no guns have silencers. Just a normal .22 round being fired from a .22 is not nearly as loud as what's fired from a 9mm or a .45. Would you agree?
A 22 has a small lower decibel than a 9mm or a 45, but they are all very loud. And in terms of me being able to differentiate the sound of the different caliber bullets, whenever I shoot, I would wear ear protection.
Right, have you ever, when you were a kid, did you ever have a cap gun?
Yes.
And would you agree that the sound that a .22 makes is much more like what a cap gun sounds like than the sound that a 9mm or a .45 makes when it's fired?
No, my cap gun did not make nearly as much noise as a 22.
Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that out of the guns that you're aware of, the .22 probably has the lowest decibel level when it's fired when compared to, as an example, a .38, a .380, a .45, a 9mm? Would you agree?
I think the 22 makes less noise than the other calibers you mentioned, but I don't think it is meaningfully less noise. You need ear protection to shoot 22s.
And you would never shoot a firearm without ear and eye protection, correct?
Correct.
And that's because you've been trained that you have to have ear protection because you don't want hearing damage, and you need eye protection because you can end up having a round that comes out of the firearm. You can end up having a casing that's ejected, etc., and you want to make sure that your eyes are protected, correct?
I never worried about my eyes. I always used ear protection.
Would you agree, Mr. Durst, given your knowledge of firearms, that if somebody were planning to use a firearm indoors and they wanted to make as little a noise as possible with that firearm, that the 22 would be their best choice?
Correct.
Would you further agree that 22 rounds, even though they're smaller, are known to bounce around? So, for instance, when a 22 is fired into the head, instead of going through and through, that round tends to bounce around. Would you agree?
I have no knowledge of that. I don't know what you mean, bounce around.
So what I'm saying is,
You shoot a 22 with something, unless it's a solid thing like a rock or a brick wall, it's going to stick in it.
you would agree, Mr. Durst, having experience with 9mm firearms as an example, that a 9mm typically when fired, assuming they're using the same kind of round, that a 9mm has a tendency to enter and exit when it confronts something, an object like a head, for instance, much more so than a .22 round, which is smaller and has a tendency when it goes in to then bounce around and not exit. Would you agree, disagree, or would you have no opinion?
I'm going to disagree with
Objection.
all of this.
Objection?
Yes.
Yeah, this is asked for expert testimony.
Yeah, the witnesses testified to familiarity
Okay.
with firearms, but not their consequences on a human body.
Okay. Mr. I want you to assume for a moment that you were going to kill somebody inside of an apartment and you want it to be as quiet as possible. Would you agree that if you did not have a silencer and you were going to use a firearm, that the best firearm to use for that purpose, the quietest one, would be the .22?
Object to the hypothetical question.
Overruled?
I have no knowledge of what one would do if they wanted to kill somebody inside of an apartment.
Well, you did admit a moment ago that, as far as you know, that the .22 is the quietest of the firearms that we discussed, right?
Yes, but I have a feeling that the difference between the sound of the .22 and the other calibers you mentioned is more or less trivial.
When you target shoot, you know the difference between fully jacketed ammunition and hollow point ammunition? You've been asked about this before. Do you know the difference?
Full metal jacket is what they call military.
Okay. And what's the difference between a fully jacketed round and a hollow point?
I think they're different things. The hollow point refers to the lead bullet, or the full metal jacket refers to the entire bullet.
Do you recall being asked about this issue during your Galveston trial on October 27, 2003 at page 165, lines 6 through 11?
No, I don't recall.
You were asked the following question. You also know that from being around guns, a hollow point bullet expands faster and therefore would do more damage than a slug would do. Answer: I had read about hollow point bullets. Question: and so you are familiar with that? Answer: I am familiar with that, yes, sir. Do you recall giving that testimony now? Or does that testimony, if you don't remember, is that consistent with your knowledge?
I don't recall the testimony. I do recall reading about hollow point bullets.
Hollow point bullets, Mr. Durst, you are aware, are designed to penetrate and then, instead of exiting like a full metal jacket bullet might, they're designed to expand, to spread, and to basically do damage. Would you agree?
Object. Asking for an expert opinion.
He's testified that he has knowledge.
Overruled, but subject to a motion to strike if you don't establish it one way or another.
Would you agree, Mr. Durst?
Hollow point bullets break apart when they hit something.
And you would agree, Mr. Durst, that you're aware that, for instance, police officers generally, people who are interested in home defense, that generally speaking, they will have hollow point bullets because not only do they expand, but because of the hollow point and they break apart, there is less chance of them going in one side, out the other, and hitting something else. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that.
would you further agree, Mr. Durst, that generally speaking, when you target shoot, you use fully jacketed ammunition, which is generally cheaper than hollow point ammunition as well? Would you agree?
I generally don't know.
So you would agree, you understand that hollow point ammunition is more expensive than fully jacketed ammunition, correct?
Correct.
And you would agree that you are aware that people who target shoot, because you have to, there's no need, you're shooting at a target, you don't need expansion, that there's no need to be firing hollow point ammunition because it's expensive. Agreed?
It's more expensive, but some people like the hollow points, period.
Right. You previously testified, and I've asked you, you've said that you are a private person or maybe very private person, and I'd asked you previously if you would ever give anybody except an extremely close friend a key to your residence. Do you remember me asking about this in New Orleans?
I have never given anybody the key to my residence. My residence is apartment 1405, 2520 Robin Hood. I never had a residence in Galveston, and I never had a residence in New York.
Well, Mr. Durst, you were living at a place on Avenue K in Galveston, correct?
Yeah, I stayed there sometimes. I never felt it was my residence.
So it's your position, Mr. Durst, that you would agree you would never give someone a key to your residence, but the distinction you're drawing is you're saying that your place in Galveston and your place in New York you didn't consider to be residences. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you've testified that you gave Morris a key to your Galveston apartment. Is that right?
Correct.
And would you agree that at times you have said that you gave Morris a key, but at other times you have said that Morris was able to get a key without your actual knowledge? Is that correct?
I think I gave Morris a key, and I took the key back. I did not realize that he had made copies.
During the March 15, 2015 interview that I had with you, did you ever explicitly deny having given Morris Black a key?
Did you ask me if I gave him a key?
RD 363, March 15, 2015, page 80, line 17, to page 81, line 7.
Where's 291? It's 291.
You need me to open that, Mr. Durst?
Sure.
So obviously, the story about giving him the key, now that we know that was bullshit. I didn't give him the key, but he had a key. He was aware that he had a key. Well, so here's what you said. You said that you gave him a key, and then you said that when he shot in the house,
Took the key away.
you took the key away. So let me tell you right now, I've gotten to know you well enough. There's no way you give Morris a key to your house when you're not there. You're a private guy. And you're not concerned enough, you don't care enough about Morris to worry that he can use your place when you're gone. You would agree that's not you, right?
I wouldn't let him use the place, but I was aware that he had obtained a key, and I never took it away from him.
Well, you had said that you actually said you took the key away from him, but you said that you thought he had copied it.
Seemingly.
Mr. Durst, you would agree that in that statement, you said that you wouldn't let him use the place, but you were aware that he had obtained a key, correct? That's on lines 2 through 3. That's what you said, correct?
I don't know. You said that you wouldn't let him use the place. After giving him the key, and after him shooting in the apartment at the eviction notice, I took the key away and said I didn't want him using it anymore.
Well, I'm going before
I
that.
did not realize he had made copies.
Well, I'm going before that. You said, I made the point that you're a private guy, and I basically told you there's no way you would give Morris a key to your place. And you said, yeah, I wouldn't let him use the place. And you said, I was aware that he had obtained a key. You did not say I had given him a key. Correct? That's what your language was. Is that right?
I said I had given him a key.
No, Mr. Durst, you said I was aware that he had obtained a key. Do you understand the difference between someone obtaining a key and someone being given a key?
Whether I say I gave him a key or he obtained a key, he obtained a key because I gave him a key.
So it's your position that by using the word obtained, that's basically a synonym for give, and you're saying the same thing? Is that your testimony?
I think when I was saying he obtained a key, I was talking about after I'd initially given him a key and after he had shot the eviction notice in the apartment and I had taken the key away, he obtained the key because he had made copies.
Whose idea was it to allow Morris to have a key to your place and to watch TV? Did you offer or did he ask and you agreed?
I think it just came up that I was going to be away for a month and he wasn't going to be able to watch television. So I said, I'll give you a key and you can watch television.
So it's your testimony that you are the one who offered to give him the key because you were going to be away, correct?
Correct.
Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that that would be a very considerate thing for you to even think of? Would you agree?
No.
No? Well, when you agree, Mr. Durst, in order to make that offer, you would have to first realize in your mind that I'm going to be gone. That means Morris won't be able to get into my place. That means Morris can't watch TV. And therefore, I should do a really kind thing and give him a key to my place. That would have to be the progression for you to make the offer if he didn't ask, correct?
Out of exhaustion, I'm going to say correct.
Mr. Durst, would you agree that you are, in a lot of ways, a narcissistic person?
No.
Would you agree, I think you have agreed, that you are a selfish person, or more than that, a self-involved person? Is that a fair characterization?
I am not a selfish person. I don't know what a self-involved person is.
Self-involved person would mean that you're somebody who tends to focus on themselves and doesn't really think about the needs of others. Would that describe you or no?
No.
So you offering Morris a key to your place, to you, that would just be kind of normal Bob Durst behavior, is that correct?
Correct.
Isn't it true, Mr. Durst, that Morris Black was shocked, allegedly, when you offered the key to him, correct?
He was grateful.
This is going to be Galveston Trial 10-2303, page 13, lines 9 through 16. Question. I want you to, as best you can, describe for the jury Morris's reaction when you said to him that you would allow him to have a key to your apartment. Answer. He was just enormously appreciative, very, very thankful. He said something to the effect that nobody had done something like that for him in years and years and years. Does that accurately describe what happened?
He was grateful, like I said.
Well, it sounds like he was more than grateful. He was almost shocked that you had been so kind. No one had ever done something like that for him, you testified, correct?
Overruled.
Yeah, what it said is what happened. He said that nobody had done something like that for him in years.
Mr. Durst, on July 25th of 2001, there was a 2020 episode on Kathy's disappearance that aired nationally that you are aware of, correct?
July 25th,
2001.
2001. On what show?
2020, ABC.
2020.
I think they called it The Vanishing. Do you remember that?
Yeah, they were going to do a whole series on people who vanished. But I was the very first one, and they did not do any more because nobody watched it.
And you agree that Morris Black was constantly watching TV, correct? And isn't it true that Morris Black saw that episode?
I have no idea.
But you previously testified that whether he saw the episode or not, you had already confided in him about Janine Pirro, so he knew about the reinvestigation, correct?
Correct.
And since he knew about the reinvestigation, Mr. Durst, he also knew before that you were wealthy, correct?
Correct.
And he knew that you were very afraid about being charged by Janine Pirro, correct?
Correct.
And he knew that in essence you were hiding out in Galveston, very concerned that she was going to find you, correct?
I was hiding out in Galveston for 3 weeks after I saw Janine Pirro on TV announced that she was going to get Robert Durst one way or another. At the end of the 3 weeks, when nothing happened, I took a Greyhound to New York City and started using my name and my credit cards and my cell phone.
Mr. Durst, we've already looked at the BD story, and you've already testified that the whole time you were in Galveston, you made a significant effort to not use your credit cards or your name where it could be connected to where you were living, correct?
When I was in Galveston, correct.
Well, you were in Galveston, Mr. Durst, until you ended up, Morris had the incident occur to him in September of 2001, correct?
No, I wasn't in Galveston most of the time.
It's not what I asked you. You were going back and forth, you gave the dates, you were in and out of Galveston between November of 2000, when you went down there, and September 28th, or 29th, excuse me, the day after Morris was killed of 2001, correct?
I would agree. I was in and out of Galveston.
And you were so concerned about Janine Pirro that you would actually set up a second residence in Louisiana, in New Orleans, also where you had disguised yourself as a woman, correct?
Correct.
That was Diane Wynn, correct?
Correct.
So I want to talk about, for a second, when I say the name Ted Hanley and the Jesse Tree Charity in Galveston, that's an organization you're familiar with, correct?
Say the name again.
Jesse Tree is the organization, and Ted Hanley was the guy who ran it.
I remember the Jesse Tree.
And do you remember
I don't
Ted
remember the guy's name.
Hanley testified at your Galveston trial in person, and we read in his testimony in this case. Do you remember?
No.
Mr. Hanley testified that Morris Black was spending his own money to buy eyeglasses to hand out to the people who received services there. Do you recall that?
No.
Do you recall Mr. Hanley testifying that Morris Black told him that he knew someone with a lot of money who would be willing to loan money to the Jesse Tree people to construct a new building? Do you recall that?
I recall that.
Do you recall that Mr. Hanley testified that a person that ended up being you came down to the Jesse Tree in disguise to apparently evaluate the charity? Is that correct?
That's what Ted Hand said.
Well, you admitted as such during your Galveston testimony, didn't you?
I went to the Jesse Tree with Morris.
Galveston trial 102303, page 42, lines 9 through 18. Says as follows, question, you have heard in the courtroom an incident described by Ted Hanley of the Jesse Tree. He describes that Morris Black had told him that he knew a person with a lot of money that might provide funding, I'm sorry, that might provide funding or a loan or an interest-free loan. And shortly after that, Mr. Hanley describes you came to the Jesse Tree with glasses with tape on them. Tell the jury what happened. Answer. Pretty much what Mr. Hanley said was true. Do you recall that testimony?
I remember going to the Jesse Tree with Morris. I don't know about this thing with glasses with tape on them.
You went down there because Morris was putting pressure on you to make a large financial contribution to the Jesse Tree, correct?
He was not putting pressure on me.
Well, was he asking you to finance or loan them money for a new building?
No.
So it's your testimony that Morris Black never asked you to contribute or donate anything to the Jesse Tree? Is that your
Never
testimony?
asked me for a large sum of money. They
What did-
never asked me to contribute to Jesse Tree.
Did he encourage or mention to you that the Jesse Tree needed money and was looking to make a building?
He talked to me about the Jesse Tree wanting to buy a building, but he never asked me for money for the Jesse Tree to buy a building.
But isn't it true, Mr. Durst, that you went down to the Jesse Tree for the specific purpose of trying to ascertain whether or not this was a legitimate organization for you to potentially give money to, correct?
Overruled.
I went down with Morris to the Jesse Tree because Morris asked me to go to the Jesse Tree.
And isn't it correct that Morris asked you to go to the Jesse Tree, and that was in connection with his discussions with you about potentially donating money to the organization, correct?
Never had that discussion.
All right, I want to talk to you again about specifically Morris and Firearms. You previously discussed that you and Morris had a mutual interest in guns, correct?
Correct.
Would you consider Morris to be knowledgeable about firearms?
He said he was.
Well, that's not the question I asked you. Would you consider Morris Black, based on your interactions with him, to be knowledgeable about firearms?
I guess not.
Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that you guess not is a severe underestimate of how unknowledgeable Morris Black was about firearms?
Well, I thought he was fine with the 22, which had little kickback.
And you and Morris went target shooting together, you have alleged, correct?
Correct.
How often did the two of you go target shooting together?
I guess for about 3 weeks we went a couple of times a week.
Do you recall saying in the BD story that the two of you would go shooting, quote, every other day?
Well, then 3 times a week.
Now, you previously stated and testified that Morris was very reckless with firearms, correct?
He was very reckless with the 9mm I first let him use.
And you discussed this in the BD story, and you testified about it under oath in Galveston, correct? Correct?
I'm sure I did testify about it. I don't remember what I said.
Galveston trial 102303, page 31, line 7 to page 33, line 23. Question. Okay, when Morris got the gun, what happened? How did he? Tell us what he did. Answer. He was familiar with it. He knew about pulling the slide back and the safety and all those issues, but what happened was that he didn't seem to appreciate the kickback from the 9mm. Question. What did he do? Answer. Well, he aimed it at the magazine picture I hung up on the telephone pole, but then rather than shooting just one bullet and getting it, bringing it back down and aiming it, he threw bullets and it threw him back. I'm just going to stop you for a moment. When you say he threw bullets, what you basically mean is you don't mean he actually threw them with his hand. You're using the term threw bullets as meaning that he fired rapidly shots, correct?
Correct.
I'm going to continue. Question. When he did that, when he shot 3 times in rapid succession, what did you think? Answer. I don't know what I thought. I said, stop, stop, stop. Question. What was your concern? Answer. The gun was out of control. He was just pulling the trigger, went out of control of the gun. Question. All right. So tell us what happened next when you held at Morris. Stop, stop, stop. Answer. Just about when I got the words out of my mouth, the gun jammed, and he brought it back down. And I said something else, something or else, and he turned towards me, and now the gun is pointing at me. And I yelled, point it down, point it down. Question. Again, the record can't see what you have demonstrated to us. You turned to the left in the direction where you were and had your hands together as if Morris with the gun. Was the gun then pointed in your direction? Answer. Oh, yes. He just turned his body towards me with the gun out in front of him, so as he turned towards me, the gun turned towards me. Answer. And what did you do then? I'm sorry, question. And what did you do then? Answer. I shouted, point it down, don't point. Something like that. Question. Now, Morris had told you that he was familiar with guns and gun safety. What did this incident tell you about that? Answer. When I took the 9mm out of the back of the car, he did say right away, quote, I thought you had a 22, unquote. But he said he had shot 9mm. But what it told me right away was that I'm not going to stand out here and shoot this pistol with him anymore. Question: well, so what did you decide to do? Answer: well, I mean, as soon as he pointed the gun down, I went over and he gave me the gun and I took the magazine out and I fixed the jam. The bullet went down to the sand and he right away picked it up, and I said, you can't shoot them once they get dirty, and you throw it away, unquote. And so he threw it someplace or other, and then I said I was uncomfortable with him and the 9mm, but that if he wanted, when I was in Houston sometime, I would buy a .22 target shooting pistol. He right away said that would be something he would like. Is that what happened, Mr. Durst?
Yeah, I think that's probably pretty accurate.
Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that in that situation, you easily could have been killed because Morris was pulling the trigger of that gun, and that the only thing that prevented you from being shot when he pointed it at you was that the gun jammed, correct?
I don't know that I would have been shot if the gun had not jammed.
Well, you said that he was pointing it at you, the gun had been going off, and you're yelling, stop, 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 point it down. So you were at least very concerned you were going to get shot, correct?
Yes, I was concerned I was going to be shot.
As a firearms enthusiast, would you agree that what you just described Morris do with the weapon is about as dangerous a thing as a person can do with a firearm? Would you agree?
I don't think he was quote-unquote dangerous with the .22. Morris's problem with the
Motion to strike is
firearm
unresponsive.
was the 9mm, which had a big kickback.
Mr. Durst, we're not talking about the .22 yet. I'm saying the 9mm, Morris has taken this firearm, he's rapid fired through a bunch of rounds that are going downrange, and then he's pointing the gun at you, and the gun is jamming as the gun is aimed in your direction, correct?
Okay, correct.
Well, Mr. Durst, you're aware of what a 9mm firearm will do if it strikes somebody, correct?
Correct.
That is a life-threatening situation, correct?
If you're shot with a 9mm, whether it would be life-threatening would depend on where you were shot.
So, Mr. Durst, the question I'm asking you is, would you agree that an individual handling a firearm in that manner, that is a life-threatening situation, correct?
Correct.
And this is why you decided that although Morris Black had told you he was knowledgeable about firearms, it became pretty clear to you that he wasn't at all, correct?
Well, he had shot before. He said that when he was in the Merchant Marine, they used to throw stuff off the boats and shoot at them.
So I'm not asking you what he said. I'm asking you what you observed, Mr. Durst, as someone experienced with firearms. You would agree that just from what I described, no competent individual would ever handle a firearm in that manner, correct?
Correct.
And then when you had to clear the jam, correct? You cleared it, right?
I cleared the jam, correct.
And that means, Mr. Durst, in your experience, would you agree that what likely happened, and maybe what saved your life, is that Morris Black, in firing the weapon, did not have a firm enough grip on the firearm? And so when it fired, instead of chambering another round, the gun jammed, preventing it from being able to go off, correct?
Jams can be caused by all kinds of things. A hair on the bullet will jam if that bullet is shot.
You would agree, Mr. Durst, you've been around people who misfire firearms, that what you describe with Morris, in essence, having a gun and all of a sudden the gun is going off unintentionally, that in your experience, when that happens, individuals lessen their grip. That grip is what allows the firearm to chamber the next round, and that appears, based on your knowledge and experience, to be why it jammed, correct?
What you're describing has to do with pistols, not with revolvers.
Mr. Durst, we weren't talking about it. We were talking about a semi-automatic firearm, not a revolver, correct?
With a pistol, you have to keep your grip very straight. You can't do it like that because then it jams. But that's not the case with a revolver.
Mr. Durst, we haven't been talking about a revolver at all, have we? When did I mention a revolver?
You're talking about guns. Guns include pistols and revolvers.
So let's restrict ourselves to the 22 and 9mm pistols that we are referring to. Those are semi-automatic handguns, not revolvers, correct?
Correct.
So what I just said regarding what appeared to have happened with the 9mm, you would agree that appears to be why it jammed, correct?
I don't know why it jammed. I just told you that if a hair falls on the bullet and the bullet is shot, it will cause a jam.
And Mr. Durst, when you cleared the firearm, you cleared it and the round that was jammed fell to the ground, right?
Correct.
And it fell, you were on sand, correct?
Correct.
And what did Morris Black try to do?
He wanted to put it back in the magazine.
So, on a scale of 1 to 100, with 1 being, well, with 100 being this is an expert, this person really knows their firearms, and 1 being the dumbest firearms person ever, who would take a round that had dropped in the sand and try to put it back in a firearm? Would you be a 1 or a 100? Or maybe a negative number?
I don't know if it would be a 30, a 40, a 10, something like that. I don't think it would be a 1.
What would it take to be a 1? Would you have to shoot somebody accidentally?
Yeah, I guess if you accidentally shoot somebody, that would be a 1.
Okay. So you would agree that having this experience with Morris Black, now he's mishandled the 9mm in a manner that could have gotten you killed, and he has attempted to reload a round that has fallen in the sand, that you've come to the conclusion that this man does not know anything about firearms, correct?
He knew how to load the magazine. He knew about putting the magazine in the pistol. He knew about the safety. He had obviously shot before.
So, after this experience, Mr. Durst, isn't it true that the only reason that you were not hurt was because the gun jammed? You testified to that, correct?
No.
What was it that prevented you from being hurt when Morris Black was pointing the gun at you and it jammed?
You're not supposed to point a gun. In order for me to be hurt, he would have to pull the trigger.
Mr. Durst, didn't you say he was pulling the trigger and the gun was still being, the trigger was being pulled after it was pointed at you, but it wasn't firing because it had already jammed, correct?
He shot a bunch of times. I said, Morris, watch what you're doing. He turned towards me. That's when I said, don't point that gun at me. and then I realized that the gun was jammed.
So, Mr. Durst, would you agree that going and getting Morris a different gun that has an even lighter trigger pull, requiring less pressure on the trigger, given the way he has handled the firearm in your presence, is absolutely a crazy thing for you to have done? Would you agree?
No, I don't agree. I don't agree that it takes less pressure to shoot a .22 than to shoot a 9mm.
The question was not that it takes less pressure to shoot a 9mm or .22 than a 9mm. The question was, and what you agreed to is, it takes less pressure to shoot a target pistol than it does to shoot a regular firearm that has not been set up for target competition, correct?
I don't know any of that.
Mr. Durst, what was the trigger pull on that firearm, that .22?
I never remember thinking the trigger pull was anything other than ordinary.
Mr. Durst, are you aware that that gun was tested and that the trigger pull on that gun was less than 3 pounds?
I'm willing to accept that. I don't remember.
Mr. Durst, isn't it true that this whole story about Morris firing this gun is completely made up for the purpose of explaining why you bought a .22 approximately a month before you murdered Morris Black? Isn't that correct?
Argument. Overall,
The story is not completely made up. The story is 100% accurate, and I did not murder Morris Black.
All right, let's talk about what you say happened on September 17, 2001. You said that while you were in the bathroom of your tiny apartment, you allegedly heard a gunshot a few feet away in your apartment, correct?
Correct.
You explained what allegedly happened to Andrew Jarecki during your December 13, 2010 interview, correct?
I guess. I don't remember.
RD 524, 12/13/10, page 7, line 29. I'm sorry, page 727, line 7.
For the court's
Third
purpose,
time.
equals 269A, page 1 of them.
Page 729.
We was going shooting, I had come back, I went to the bathroom, he was in the living room, and he shot the pistol in the house. And I go, oh, he shot the pistol at the eviction letter that he had put up on the wall, taped or thumbtacked or whatever up on the wall. And I went out of it back. First I was sure it was outside, and then I heard he did it again. And then I was sure it was inside, and I went out, and he's got the gun in his hand. I said, put the gun down and get out of here.
So, Mr. Durst, your testimony, is that accurate? Is that what happened?
Yes.
So your testimony is that you're in your bathroom in this tiny apartment is maybe what, 400 square feet total? It's almost like a hotel room size, right?
A big suite in a hotel.
But it's basically, there's not a separate bedroom, correct?
Correct.
It's basically kind of a living room, bedroom area, a little tiny bathroom, and a kitchen
Correct.
that are all connected, right? Is that correct?
Correct.
So you're in the bathroom, and you're telling us that in this apartment building where other people live, your testimony is you hear Morris firing a gun not once but twice inside the apartment. Is that your testimony?
Yes.
And you said he was firing at the eviction notice. This was his eviction notice from Klaus Dillman, is that correct?
Correct.
And you heard he fired 2 shots, correct?
Correct.
And he's standing right next to the eviction notice, correct?
No, eviction notice was on one wall where the kitchen was, and he was standing by the other wall by the front window.
That's maybe 7 feet away, correct, Mr. Durst? Maybe?
Or 20 feet away.
You're saying you believe that it's 20 feet in that tiny apartment from the window where he was standing to the wall? Is that your testimony?
16 feet.
You want to go any lower, or you want to stay at 16? How about maybe 10 or 8?
More than 10, 12.
Right. So your position is that Morris Black is standing, you're saying 12 feet away. He fires 2 shots at the eviction notice. You're aware the eviction notice was eventually recovered, correct?
Correct.
And you've seen that eviction notice, correct?
I saw the eviction notice.
There's no hole whatsoever in the eviction notice, correct?
Correct.
After this incident, what was your response?
I took the key away from him.
Were you shocked, scared, angry? What was your response?
Angry.
I would assume, Mr. Durst, have you ever in your life had someone fire a pistol inside of your residence?
No, that was the only time.
So it's maybe the reason you gave Morris a 20 or a 30 for whatever he did on the beach. You agree, quite possibly he's done something even stupider in your apartment, right?
I don't know what you mean. The reason you gave Morris 20 or 30.
Oh, I asked you, I remember we were rating the how terrible is Morris with a firearm and how dangerous is he? And I asked you if he'd be a 1, meaning the most dangerous. You said a 1 would be if you killed somebody.
Oh,
So you said the other one was like a 30 to 40. What's this one?
yeah, I would go with a 20 or 30.
Okay. And you would agree it's one of the most dangerous things you've ever seen somebody do with a firearm, correct?
I'm trying to think if I've had other experiences with someone with a firearm doing something dangerous. I've certainly been in situations where people would point guns.
So, did you immediately take the key to your residence away from Morris?
Yes,
And that's what you testified to in Galveston, correct?
I believe so.
Page 102303, page 60, lines 8 through 22. you start, I said, I want you to give me back the key and I want you to get out of here. Oh. Okay, I'll just read it for mine. No, that's not the right one. Let me strike that. I said, you could have hit me. Where did the bullet? I was just flabbergasted. He seemed to think it was just a minor prank almost. Question, what did you say to him? Answer, I think I was sort of tongue-tied. It just seems so obvious to me that you can't shoot a gun in an apartment. He was 20 feet away from where I was. Question, and so what did you do? Answer, I said, I want you to give me back the key and I want you to get out of here. Question, so did he give you the key? Answer, he took the key off of his chain and he took the eviction notice. Is that what happened? Was that what happened, Mr. Durst?
I'm reading.
Oh, I thought you were listening to me.
Even that, he has to look at the screen.
That's what happened.
And would you agree that you were able to give a pretty vivid description of what happened and your response to it, correct?
Correct.
Now, on September 24th, 2001, 1 week later, there was a second shooting, alleged shooting in your apartment, correct?
Correct.
What happened this time? Take us step by step.
Well, Morris shot the gun in the apartment again.
What happened exactly?
I heard the sound of a shot, and I realized that Morris had the gun and must have shot in the part of the kitchen where I kept the boxes for the appliances.
When this happened, were you inside the apartment?
Correct.
And had you already been in the apartment with Morris, or was Morris in the apartment when you got there that day?
I think I got to the apartment. What did happen? I was in the apartment. Morris knocked on the door and I told him to come in.
Is that what you testified to in Galveston, Mr. Durst?
I think so.
You don't actually remember what you testified to, do you?
My recollection is I was in the apartment, Morris knocked on the door, and I invited him in. I would hope that I testified to that.
Do you recall
I don't remember what I testified.
Do you recall testifying on 10/23/03, page 69, lines 13 through 22? So I left the car there, and you were referring to the temple, and I jogged to 2213 Avenue K. I walked up the steps to the front of the building and opened the door, and I heard the television on. Question, you heard the television? Answer, yes, sir. Question, well, now Morris Black didn't have a television in his apartment, did he? Answer, no, it was a television in my apartment. Do you recall, does that refresh your memory?
Yes, but that's talking about the 28th or 29th, whenever we had the fallout.
Are you sure, Mr. Durst?
Yeah, Morris died on either September 28th or 29th. I don't remember now which one it is.
So, Mr. Durst, wasn't the situation, in fact, didn't you also say that you had entered into the apartment on that date and found Morris already in there, and that you were trying to figure out how he could have gotten there because you had taken the key away after the first shooting a week earlier. Do you recall that?
Well, I don't know what day we're talking about now.
We're talking about the September 24th, the second incident with the gun. We're not talking about when
That's
Morris
what
was
I
killed.
thought. So is there a question to me?
Do you remember testifying during direct examination at your trial? This is going to be page 70, lines 18 to page 71, line 13. So what did you do? What did you see when you saw Morris? You knew you had taken the key away from him. Answer: I wasn't immediately annoyed. I was immediately annoyed. Quote, Morris, you're not supposed to have another key. The whole idea of me taking the key away and saying you couldn't come in here when I wasn't here is that I don't want you in here, unquote. It was difficult to try to explain the obvious. What was his reaction? Answer: well, he was apologetic and he was sorry, but he really wanted to stay and watch television. He right away gave me the key back. He won't do it anymore. I asked if he had any other keys and he said he did not. So apparently he had at least one other key made. Answer: yes. So did you kick him out or not? Answer: I did not. That's what you testified in Galveston, correct?
That's correct.
Well, Mr. Durst, that's not the story that you started with here. The story you started with here was that you were in the house and Morris was in the apartment, together. So did you just forget what happened, or did you forget your lie?
I was talking about a different day.
Well, Mr. Durst, would you agree that there is not, the next day we're going to be talking about, which is the 28th, you weren't in the apartment then either. You entered again, and Morris was already there, correct?
What day are we talking about?
There are 3 incidents. Is that correct, Mr. Durst? The 17th, the 24th, and the 28th. Is that right?
Correct.
The 17th, you were already in the apartment with Morris. You were in the bathroom. Is that correct? The first incident.
That's correct.
The 24th, though, Mr. Durst, which I just asked you about, you originally said that you were inside the residence when Morris shot in the kitchen. But I just read to you your testimony from Galveston, and you said that you had actually jogged up to the apartment, the same thing you're going to say you did on the 28th when Morris was killed, and that Morris was already inside. So my question is, did you forget what happened, or are you intentionally lying to us today in court?
Well, neither of those. I did not forget what happened, and I'm not lying about it. I thought you were talking about the 28th
So,
when you were talking about the 24th.
Mr. Durst, though, but the 28th is also a situation where you were not in the apartment when you come there and Morris is already inside, correct?
Correct.
So, Mr. Durst, you could not have mistaken what I told you for the 28th, because both the 24th and 28th allegedly involve situations where you are entering the apartment and finding Morris there, correct?
Correct.
So you testified in Galveston that that's what happened, correct?
Correct.
But today, when I asked you about the 24th, you said that you were already in the apartment, correct?
I thought you were talking about the 17th.
Well, Mr. Durst, so a moment ago, you said you thought I was talking about the 28th. Now you realize you got caught on a lie, and you're now trying to figure out, what can I do to square this?
I am not trying to figure out anything.
Objection, comment on the testimony.
Overruled. It's coming up on,
About the testimony.
pardon me?
Reacting to the testimony, Your Honor.
I don't think that's an objection, Your Honor.
No, it isn't. I've instructed you not to comment on a answer. I don't think that's what you did.
No,
So
I'm-
I overruled it. It's time for a break, though.
No, thank you, Your Honor.
So, ladies and gentlemen, do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this case. Do not form or express any opinion on the case. This is a short day today, but I'm gonna have you come back at 3:25. We'll see what else we can get done. 3:25, short day.